It's a special edition of the Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast. We are joined by Belle Fraser from the Salt Lake Tribune. Robin and I and Belle coming your way right now.
You are Locked On Utah Hockey Club, your daily podcast on the Utah Hockey Club, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in once again to the Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast. I'm Tom Callahan, joined by Robin Leano, and today we have a special guest, Belle Fraser, joining us from the Salt Lake Tribune. Thanks for making us your first listen or your first watch every single day. We love talking puck with you about it, and you know what, Belle, thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be here. Always love talking Utah Hockey Club, so it should be a good time.
You know, it's been an interesting process, right? And now that we're in March, it's really a full calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't imagine what the last year has been like for you, you know, trying to wrap your arms around that, let alone everybody in the franchise and even us, you know, chronicling the move from Phoenix up to Salt Lake. And it's just been a crazy year.
Yeah, it has. It's wild to think. It's March now. Yeah, I guess April was when they got acquired, which when we were coming into the season felt like so recent because the storyline then was look at everything they've done in 3.5, 4 months. And it's really crazy when we're recording this. They have 18 games left in the regular season and you hope they push it to the playoffs. But either way, I mean, I think you look at where this franchise started a year ago to where it is today, the amount they've gotten done on and off the ice has been tremendous. And also just the hockey culture and fandom that has grown here in Salt Lake City has been one of my favorite parts to see. So yeah, I think once the season ends, we'll all be able to take a deep breath and actually appreciate what's been kind of a whirlwind of the last 11, 12 months. So right now we're still pushing through, going forward, kind of in the grind, but it'll be really cool when everyone gets some time this summer to kind of just look back on what has been a really historic year for the NHL and for Utah hockey.
So I know we're going to talk a lot about the team, and we're going to save that till a little after. But right now, I'd like for our listeners and our viewers to get to know you a little bit better. Talk about your path. How did you even end up, as the beat reporter for the Utah Hockey Club? What was your path in your career?
Yeah, well, if we're going all the way back, I'm from New York City. I grew up in downtown Manhattan, kind of by Madison Square Garden, which was a benefit for me because I grew up going to games with my dad, who was a really big hockey fan growing up. He still plays in the Chelsea Piers Men's League in New York. So shout out to him. He has not given up the hockey dream, but he really got me into hockey. And then I was always into writing and journalism in high school and middle school, I'm sure people have heard me say this, but New York Post was one of my favorite newspapers just because that's kind of the sports Bible in New York. And then as I got older, I think I started to appreciate, the craft of sports writing a bit more. It wasn't just something that I would just read after the games. I was really interested in the structure and the different narratives that these reporters were able to get out of the players and the teams. So that sent me on my path. I applied to Boston University, their journalism program, specifically because they had a D1 hockey program as well. The Rangers had just gotten a new head coach, David Quinn, and David Quinn was previously the head coach at Boston University. So when he was announced, I was like, Dad, he coached at a college. Like, maybe I should go check that college out if he's now the Rangers coach. So coincidentally, David Quinn is kind of the reason I looked into BU and I visited and fell in love with it. So I was on the student newspaper there for 4 years and covered both men's and women's Boston University Division I hockey. I got to cover 2 Frozen Fours, which was really cool. And a lot of the players that we see on Utah's team and around the league, I got to cover in college. Logan Cooley, they played Matthew Nyes last night. I covered both of their Frozen Fours. So it's cool to kind of see them in this next stage of their own careers. And then, I was at the New York Post for a summer. I covered the Bruins for the Hockey News last year. And then I graduated in May and I briefly had a job in Boston, and then Utah came calling, and it's, an opportunity. NHL beat is kind of all I ever dreamed for and worked towards. That was the ultimate goal. So of course, moving across the country was a little bit daunting on like a 15-day notice, but I think that's just, the leap you have to take sometimes, and it's worked out so well. And I'm super grateful for the chance that the Tribune gave me and just all the opportunities I've had out here to cover the inaugural season. So long-winded, but that's kind of how I made it to where I am today.
Robin?
Yeah, I mean, like I mean, I'd always loved hearing, you know, those college stories and everything like that. You mentioned all the Frozen Fours. Do you have any favorites that you got a chance to cover? Any favorite stories? Any favorite players as you went through covering college hockey?
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel bad talking about it for Logan Cooley, but the 2023 Frozen Four, that BU team, it was Jay Pandolfo's first year as head coach of BU. He was an assistant for the Boston Bruins before, but was captain at BU when he was a player. You know, he came back and reinvigorated the program. And even though BU is on the national stage now, they were kind of the underdogs of that season. So the fact they made it to the Frozen Four in the first place was so much fun for us as student media. Like, I was a junior in college, getting to be alongside like NHL reporters that I grew up reading, and you have the credential because you're technically the team's media coverage, and it's an experience that, I mean, I highly recommend to anyone. The connections you make and just the level of hockey you get to cover was so cool. So I think that was super fun. It was in Tampa, which obviously is a great location. Got a little sun outside of Boston, and then that national championship game was insane. BU unfortunately lost in the semis, but we stayed for the finals. And Quinnipiac won in overtime, like 5 seconds into overtime off of the face-off. And everyone had counted Quinnipiac out. They were kind of not a blue blood of college hockey at all. And they came in and beat Minnesota, who had a 3-2 goal lead in the third period. So I think I can say that was one of my favorite games because I didn't have stakes in it. Neither one was my team. So it was kind of just fun being able to cover it stress-free. But yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite moment or player from that. I think the whole experience just kind of reconfirmed for me that that's what I wanted to do. And very lucky that BU was good enough when I was there that it allowed us to make that trip.
Well, Belle, that makes a lot of sense why you were not afraid to stir the bean pot this past spring and get in there with the guys and ask them about their thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, it was funny because Utah, I think, is one of 2 or 3 teams in the NHL with all 4 Beanpot schools represented on it. So all the beat reporters are sick of hearing me talk about Boston hockey and the Beanpot and everything of that nature. But the guys in the locker room were talking about it. So I was like, it's not just me. If the story's there, it's there. And it was fun. They were all, chirping each other and making bets about who was going to win. And Kesslering won when he was there, as did Alex Kerfoot when he was there. But Jack McBain and Clayton Keller are Beanpotless. But yeah, it's always funny, talking to the players about their lives before the NHL. I feel like they sometimes open up more when you're not asking about the current playoff race or their current play. So it's always, a fun thing to catch up on.
I wanted to ask you so it sounds like you always loved hockey, and this is kind of, you knew where you were going with this, but so you talked about being next to some NHL reporters and some folks that you were reading and maybe you looked up to. Who were some of the people that you looked up to going through your journey?
Yeah, I mean, New York Post, I think any Rangers fan has read Larry Brooks forever. He's kind of the New York sports writer. But then, Molly Walker came onto the scene and she kind of took over the beat. And she was one of the first full-time female beat reporters that I really read and resonated with. It was a team that I was following. And then getting to intern with the Post that summer, she was such a great mentor. Advice in writing, but also just how to handle yourself in the industry and, how to be a woman in the industry. And when I was going through this Utah job, she was someone I reached out to, and she's just been a great resource. So I think obviously she's incredibly talented, but it's been really cool to see a woman kind of rise to the ranks that she has in such a big market like New York. And in Boston last year too, I mean, I was on that beat, but it really felt more like a learning experience than a job for me. I think about Fluto Shinzawa from The Athletic. I always loved the way he worded questions, and I always followed the way he took attendance at practice, and just the little routines that these beat writers do, I think have made up what I do now. Of course, you have your own kind of niches in your reporting and stuff, but I think really just a sponge to the people around you. And yeah, I think those are some of the writers. And then, of course, there's mentors throughout your college career and childhood. I mean, my family has been there for me every step of the way. And shout out Andrew Mahoney. He was He's a college hockey reporter for the Boston Globe and has been such a big mentor for me. Same with a lot of my professors at BU. So it takes a village. I know that's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it really does. And, I feel very fortunate that I've kind of crossed paths with a lot of really amazing people along the way.
Belle Fraser from the Salt Lake Tribune is our guest. We're going to take a quick break here, come back with more of Belle and talk some Utah Hockey Club as well. So stay tuned. There's more coming your way here in the Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast. And today's show is brought to you in part by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel's giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year. I always fill out a bracket. It's usually bad, but that's fine because FanDuel makes it easy to back them up with spreads, totals, game props. It's awesome. And of course, during the tournament, there's wall-to-wall game action. There's always something exciting to bet on. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Okay, Tom Callahan, Robin Leaño, and Belle Fraser here with us as we're talking the Utah Hockey Club and asking Belle just about, her path, where she came from. Belle growing up in New York City as a Rangers fan. That's kind of interesting. How have you found the transition? Because I had to make the same transition in my career, especially when I got to Nashville and was calling games for the Preds. I remember the first game I went into Buffalo to call a game in Buffalo. And, I grew up watching this team my whole life. And all of a sudden it's like, they're the bad guys. Have you had that experience? What does that feel like to you?
Yeah, I think the team that made me fall in love with hockey for the Rangers, most of them aren't on the team anymore. Chris Kreider is probably the last remaining one. And we've talked about this, but it's funny. Dominic Moore is such a big part of the Utah broadcast. And he was part of that Rangers team when I was growing up. He scored the goal that sent them to the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's funny how the world works that way. I think if Utah was playing the 2013-14 Rangers, I would have a harder time covering it. But at this point, I almost feel so far removed from the fandom just because this is my job now, and you really can't have personal stakes in the games. But I don't let it seep into my reporting. But at the same time, I think you really have to stand there and be like, wow, like I am covering a New York Rangers game right now. That is really cool. And you're able to appreciate it for what it is. When they came to Utah, that was really cool. My family came out and was here for the game. It was cool sharing it with them. And then obviously Utah was in New York for the New York Rangers opening night. So I got to go back to Madison Square Garden. So I think those are just special parts of my early career that I'll remember for the rest of my life. And that makes it special. But yeah, you kind of have to throw away any fandom you have for those 60 plus minutes and just focus on the game story.
But again, as you mentioned, though, it's that surreal feeling there, right, of having kind of like both those connections, your professional career plus your old, personal background. I know we've all been there, right?
Yeah, no, totally. There were so many moments this season still where I'm like, I can't believe this is actually my job. Like, you're on the road in arenas that you've watched on TV your whole life, and you're like, wow, it's kind of imposter syndrome. I've learned to have confidence in myself and kind of grow in that area. But you definitely feel kind of very small compared to the moment when you're in these situations. And it's such a cool part of the job, just getting to have experiences that you really would never get as a fan growing up.
I mean, speaking of experiences, you got a chance to cover the this last international tournament and the Four Nations. Like, tell us about that experience, because that's a whole different thing, especially getting a chance to see U.S. versus Canada and all of that.
Yeah, that was amazing. It was unfortunate Finland obviously lost, but Olli Maatta was a really big part of that decor. And it was funny, I was talking to him. He was saying how it kind of was similar to Utah, where they had 2 to 3 important injuries on the back end. He had more responsibility, was a veteran leader on that Finland team, and they had high praise for him. So it was really interesting and insightful seeing the way he interacts with different teammates, and the comments that those players and Finland's coach had for him are kind of the exact same comments they have over here in Utah. So I think that consistency in his play and kind of his responsibility makes sense why he got a 3-year extension. So it's definitely cool covering Utah players in a different environment. But yeah, once that game was over, I think everyone was secretly happy that Finland lost. You could get a rematch of USA Canada. And that was so cool. I mean, I went to literally every practice and media availability, even if we weren't writing a story, because you were hearing from NHL greats. And to see that amount of star power in the locker rooms and the games, I'm sure you guys can agree, like the fastest pace, obviously highest skill. TD Garden was exploding for the national anthems and throughout the game. So that was another pinch me moment where you're doing your work, you're hitting your deadlines, you're getting your stories in. But I definitely had chills throughout that game and was sending photos and videos to the family group chat for sure. So I like to keep a balance of letting myself enjoy the moment. But yeah, that's definitely on probably top 3 games of this year.
I was actually going to ask you about that because you talked about, it's a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I think everybody can relate to that at some point in their life. And then, but you get these pinch me moments along the way. So that was probably the answer to my question. But so I'll just ask anyway. Outside of that, what was maybe 1 or 2 of your other biggest moments where you're like, wow, this is real?
I think every morning skate when you come into an empty Delta Center. And it's you and a handful of other reporters and the team practicing. And you're like, my morning at work right now is getting the line combinations. Then I'm going to go talk to the players and coach and write a story. And then when you see the visiting teams practice after, I think that's been one of the most amazing things too, where every visiting team will skate at Delta Center before the game. So we've seen at this point in the season, almost all of the NHL stars on Delta Center ice or at the Olympic Oval. So I think that's been really cool for us because we get to go talk to those players and those coaches after their morning skate and after their practices. So the access you have to stories beyond the Utah Hockey Club locker room is really beneficial for us. Recently, Matt Zuccarello and the Minnesota Wild were in Utah, and my dog growing up, its name was Zook. And I posted a picture on Twitter, but when I don't know how old I was, probably like 12, I brought a sign to a Rangers game that said, Zook, I named my dog after you or something, and he threw me a puck. So it was funny sitting in the stands, covering that practice, covering the game that he was in. And yeah, thinking back to that moment when I was in the crowd hoping Matt Zuccarello threw me a puck getting to cover an NHL game that he's in. I think you just are so humbled by it. And yeah, that's really, it's hard to put into words, how special those full circle moments are.
Did you tell him that story? And how old did he feel if you did?
No, I did not. My dad was like, you have to tell him. I was like, I'm a professional. I will not go in there and tell him my fan story. No, I didn't. Maybe I should have, but I chickened out.
You'll be able to share a laugh about it one of these days.
Yeah.
I'm sure. We do talk, Rob, and I'm going to open this up for you too, because we talk a lot about women's hockey and the path it's on. And Robin and I, we're very vocal advocates of the Professional Women's League, Olympic women's hockey. What's your take on the state of the game right now and what it looks like heading into the future?
I mean, I think the last 2-3 years have been really important for women's hockey, especially with the PWHL. You look at their first season and the first couple of games were sellouts and people were like, oh, it's just because people are excited right now and it's not going to last. And that has been the opposite of the truth. So I think the fact that they came together and formed one league where these players can play after college or in the next stage of their career is really important, because I think when they were 2 separate leagues, the NHL couldn't really partner with them because they couldn't choose a league to favor. And I think it's just a really good platform for young girls to be able to watch players that look like them, that might take a similar path as them. And on, a personal level, to bring it back to BU, apologies to keep talking about that. But, a lot of those female athletes would talk about wanting to win so much at the collegiate level because that was probably it for them. Some of them go play overseas or on different professional teams. But before the PWHL, it was, you win in college and you make the most of your career here. And then half of them were pre-med or poli-sci majors or in communications. They were on D1 teams trying to make the most of the end of their hockey career, really, because there wasn't a lot after college. But a lot of those players are now in the PWHL. Jessie Compher was at BU when I was there. And it's so cool to see her be one of the stars of that league. So it just makes me really happy for, peers and young women who get to the collegiate level who don't have to end after that. And then in Utah too, it's funny you ask, because I'm actually writing a story about this, but the team has partnered with a lot of youth girls hockey programs in the area. Specifically, Alex Kerfoot and his wife have donated a lot of tickets to those programs where girls get to come to the game and they get to go through warm-ups and sit on the bench and kind of talk to the guys and see the NHL up close. And Christy Davis, who I talked to, she's the program coordinator for the Ogden Junior Mustangs. She said, what's been really important for those girls is to have support from someone that's not their coaches or not their parents. They kind of expect to be cheered on by their coaches and parents and people within their own circle. But when the NHL and an alternate captain on your, home state's NHL team comes forward and says, I want to bring you guys into this community. I want to support your program. I want to make sure that even though we're a men's team, girls hockey isn't left behind in Utah. That has a really big impact. So I think it's been really cool to see in Utah that not only is the NHL growing, but they're bringing along the community with them. And with their new practice facility next year, I think they're going to have 3 or 2 sheets of ice where they'll let youth programs skate. And I can only imagine the growth in those relationships and initiatives. So on the grand scheme of things, like we were talking about with the PWHL, that's great. But I think in the very grassroots level here, it's something that the team has put on their priority list. And I think when the players take it on, that means even more to the young girls that they know that they're supported by these new stars in their city.
I'm so glad you mentioned the grassroots level part of it, because I think that, I think that's all that more important, all that same amount of importance as seeing, seeing the PWHL go. And I can say, someone, I still live here in Arizona, and I continue to see the growth of the Arizona Kachinas, despite, the formerly known as Arizona Coyotes being over in Utah. There's still a growth where a former U.S. Olympian Lindsey Fry continues to run that program. She does it so well. She's a coach for the elite program, and I talk to someone and girls about it every day, because I'm at that rink. I play at that rink. I work at that rink occasionally, and they tell me how much they love it and how much it means to them that program is there. But also, I'll have PWHL games on, and you can imagine seeing how many people will come in watching those games and being really heavily invested into it. Seeing the growth of women's hockey has been absolutely amazing, and it's I'm glad that to see the last couple of years, especially as you talked about, it's been it's been unreal.
It has. And, selfishly, it's exciting for me who's covered women's hockey. Of course, covering the NHL is awesome, but it's fun when it kind of intersects. I loved writing that story about the Mustangs and the way Alex Kerfoot and this team has kind of changed their lives. And she said it reinvigorated their passion for the sport. They want to now push themselves to be the best level so they can come back and tell the players that they got a college deal, or, they're playing on the tier 2 team or made the travel team. So I think it's really the little, like you said, the grassroots programs in these kids' hometowns that make all the difference. No impact is too small. I think that's been proven in the first 8 months Utah Hockey Club has been here. Now,
you got a chance to get that also the experience at the international stage. I know the U.S. Canada has their rivalry series. The women's team has have their rivalry series where they play about 2 or 3 games a year in select cities. I know they had one at the Maverick Center this past few months ago. Did you get over to that game, and how was that one?
I was on the road, unfortunately, with Utah Hockey Club. We were on the plane flying back, I believe, when that game was happening. Unfortunately, U.S. dropped in the shootout. But I think that was really, really amazing, too, especially at the Maverick Center. There's been a lot of talk about suddenly hockey's in Utah, and a lot of the Grizzlies fans are like, actually, the Maverick Center and hockey has been in Utah for a long time. So bringing that aspect into it. But I think, putting women's hockey on the international level, U.S., Canada, in any form on a bigger stage, it takes one game, one exciting game, a rivalry game to get someone into the sport. So as much as they can do that, I think everyone wants that to happen more. And it's amazing, again, that Utah has been a stage for that the Maverick Center was chosen for that, and that the PWHL has been doing tours around different NHL arenas. And who knows if the Delta Center will be on that list in the future, but you really there's so much open opportunity here, I think, to continue that initiative, which I'm excited to see.
Belle Fraser is our special guest here. We're going to be right back, and we're actually going to talk about the Utah Hockey Club. I promise. That's coming up here in just a moment.
And today's episode brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needs to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling and get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored job posts puts your job post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I know a lot of y'all have probably been there where you just need that right hire. Again, just like yesterday, with that pressure's on, and every day without the right person can be a real setback. That's why when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy, they make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. You can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need.
Tom Callahan with Robin Leano here in the Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast, and our special guest, Belle Fraser from the Salt Lake Tribune on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Belle with an E, 2 E's, I guess, technically, Fraser and the number 1. So please go give her a follow over there. Belle, I'm going to ask your thoughts on the naming and all that stuff towards the end of it, because it always comes up. But I'm going to start with this one. And then, Robin, you can jump in here too, is if I'm going to ask you to give a little mini State of the Union on the Utah Hockey Club, where they are now post deadline, what's your assessment?
I think confident would be a word I would use to describe at least how the players are feeling, and reassured. This was the first time in 4 to 5 years that they did not bid farewell to 4, 3, 5 teammates at the deadline. And I think that does a lot for the locker room, where Bill Armstrong, sure, maybe there was a deal on the table that he didn't get done and they could have seen a player leave, but that didn't happen. And I think it shows that he has confidence and belief in the guys in the locker room right now, that they are the pieces who will push this team over the edge. And I think that was even more reinforced with the contract extensions he gave. We talked about Olli Maatta, Alex Kerfoot, Ian Cole, Karel Vejmelka. He committed to those veterans, and I think it's a great bridge when you think about the prospects that Utah has in the pipeline, that Bill Armstrong, not that they're a Band-Aid, but he's like, we are good with this. We don't need to add anything crazy in this moment. And if we can carry this group into next season and use free agency to our advantage, we're right there. So I think that gives the players a lot of belief and just stability. I mean, sure, we can talk about on the ice, but I think when you think about the human side of things, their lives were completely flipped upside down. And although we've gotten used to Utah Hockey Club, they've gotten used to Delta Center and their new home, it's a lot. And I think just now they're only starting to find consistency in their game. In the beginning of the season, they would win 3 straight, lose 7 straight. And you wouldn't really know the type of game Utah was going to come out and play. They kind of looked like a different group every single night. And now I think you know what they're going to do. They're going to battle hard. They're going to be hard-nosed. They're not afraid to be physical, but they rely on their skill and they rely on their flair. And when their special teams are going, they're a really hard team to beat. And now that they have such strong goaltending in Vejmelka too, I think you see the pieces coming together. And you look at last night's game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, Andre Torini said, I don't think we lost that game. I can't go into the locker room and tell my team we lost that game, because other than not getting the second point, that was unreal. The character we showed with Michael Kessering and the way they've dealt with adversity, I think, has been a complete 180. Earlier in the season, if they were down 3-0 in the second period, they probably would have lost that game 6-1. You know, the mental part of it, the voices on the bench, I just don't think the maturity was there yet. And yet last night, Kessering gets in that fight. He swings the momentum. They score 3 goals in 4.5 minutes in the second period to tie it up. And they control the pace of play in third period, and they could have won it in overtime. So I think confidence and just their way that they can deal with a challenge now. They have the mental toughness and the game plan to kind of fall back on that they didn't have earlier in the season. So, yeah, I mean, I think State of the Union is that they have progressed, and that's really all you can ask. They're playing in meaningful games right now. They're consistently 3 to 4 points out of the second wildcard spot, and they're keeping it interesting until the final regular season game on April 15th, I believe. So that's where this team wanted to be at this point in the season. And of course, playoffs would be an extra cherry on top. But I think the fact that I think it's almost unrecognizable from October right now is a really big positive for Utah Hockey Club fans.
I mean, Tom and I have talked about how, I think a lot of, you mentioned adversity. I mean, this team has gone through so much injuries, right?
Yeah.
And now this is as close to as a healthy team, and it came around the perfect time, post Four Nations, around the time when all the extensions hit. Did that play from your perspective, a decent amount in that confidence?
1,000%. And I think part of it is just players are able to be better in shorter minutes. Mikhail Sergachev was skating 28 minutes a night, which is not sustainable. And he didn't complain about it, and he consistently made it through the game, but you're not going to get his highest level of play when you're playing close to 30 minutes. Now that he's in that 22 to 25 minute range, he's a lot better. They can use him in more situations, power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. I mean, he's out there for everything. But then we mentioned Michael Kessering. I think you also look at a guy like him whose role has maybe been lessened with Sean Dursey and John Marino back. He's playing 12 to 15 minutes a night now instead of 20. But he's talked to us last night that he needs to find new ways to impact the game. So he fought. So he's shooting more. So he's hitting a bit more. And that's what guys, I think it's a good thing, where they're not being overused. They're not exhausted by halfway through the third period. They're not running out of gas. And I think a lot of these late game comebacks have just happened because they finally have that depth. They have 4 healthy forward lines. They have 3 healthy D pairs, not to mention with extra defensemen and forwards out of the lineup who are legitimate NHL players. So it's the best problem to have for an NHL team when you have to keep players out of the lineup because you have too many to pick from. Yeah, I think them being healthy for the first time basically all season, you're finally getting to see probably the lineup and the roster and the style of play that was imagined by Bill Armstrong in the summer. Unfortunately, it took 60 plus games to see it finally come to fruition. But now that it's here, I think it's pretty exciting to see the potential that a healthy Utah group has for the future.
Robin and I would talk about the mental mistakes and the inconsistencies. And I mean, it dominated our early season conversation.
Yeah.
What was the term we used? Consistently inconsistent.
Yep. And I like talking about the naps. They would take naps during the game.
Yeah.
Just forget what they were doing for 5 minutes
The
and take a
second
nap.
period naps.
Oh my goodness. There were so many of them. But do you think now that, obviously the healthy decor, 6 actual defensemen out there has been fantastic instead of, and not that it's a bad thing. They've shown their depth. They were plugging holes with different guys, but being able to have consistency in the pairings night to night, has that helped reduce some of those mental mistakes?
Yeah, I think they're humans. The amount of reps you get playing night to night and with a consistent partner has to help the way you play, the way you think the game. And when Sean Dursey came back from injury, he talked a lot about that, where he did everything he could to come back as physically strong as he can, but it's getting your brain up to speed with your feet and your hands and your stick during the games. And he said that playing with Olli Maatta has been really great for him because he's seen how Maatta prepares, and that's been a partner that he's been with for every game since he's been back. So I think for them, just getting that time together and knowing each other's tendencies too, I think that helps you avoid the little mistakes, the turnovers when, okay, I know Olli will be here to back me up because I usually go up in the play. And I think that's been a really big benefit. You also see that with Sergachev and John Marino. Those two, I think, really have felt each other out a lot better. Marino was joking when he first came back that he was just going to give Sergachev the puck and, he knows he's a two-way defenseman, but if Sergachev's open, you're going to let him have the puck, which of course, that's the thought of most people, but I think Marino's got a lot more comfortable in his puck moving abilities, but also Sergachev has complemented his angling and the way he uses his body when he doesn't have the puck. So I think for everyone, just to get to know the type of player their partner is and be able to play with them for stretches of games. Sergachev played with 3 different partners, and before Marino came back, it feels like everyone played with everyone until the last month and a half or so. So yes, to answer your question completely, I think that really helps. the same way it would help us to have a consistent coworker to know what we're going to talk about in the podcast or what we're going to write. I think the same applies to them on the ice.
Robin, you want to toss one more out there?
No, I think we covered a lot of that.
Well, I've got the big question. Belle, what's this team going to be called?
I don't know. I voted for Mammoth just because, I mean, I like the concept of Outlaws. I think if their colors weren't blue, black, and white, and they weren't already branded as this wintry, mountainy team, it would be a cool thing to fledge out. But I think Mammoth kind of matches with the brand identity that the fans have formed for the team so far. They've done a really good job without having an official name. They come in with their Mammoth outfits or the Yeti hats, and I think they've really embraced the snow monster-ish vibe that this team has. So I said Mammoth. I don't have a super, super strong opinion. I just hope fans are happy and they feel unified and more like a legitimate NHL team once the name is announced. What did you guys what do you guys want it to be?
Well, I was a big Yeti supporter, but now
I think everyone.
Mammoth. I'm on Team Mammoth now, so
I was kind of going back and forth between Mammoth and Yeti at first. And since Yeti went out, I'm like, all right, let's go all in on Mammoth. Let's go.
Yeah.
I think it was like the hashtag Tuss Up has been trending.
Up,
so
yeah.
so like, hey, let's do it. Let's go hashtag Tuss Up.
Yeah,
I feel like though, if you go Utah HC, if you keep the HC, you could use a Yeti for a mascot, because who's to say what an HC is, right?
So that was, I think, the shortcut that they were hoping people would vote for Utah HC, because in the surveys in the arena, I'm sure you guys have seen the logos leaked, but they attached a logo to each one, and it was basically a Yeti for the Utah HC one. So I think secretly they're like, people vote for Utah Hockey Club. We could keep the branding. We've kind of been planning for the past year, but I mean, again, I think Utah Hockey Club is unique. If you were able to use the Yeti branding, great. I just think it'll be good for people to have the name, have it stop being such a, contended topic, and let the players also have a mascot. It'll be easier to write and talk about when you can say a name instead of Hockey Club every time. But it'll be a fun tidbit to this summer.
It goes back to like one of the things I mentioned, like when I first started doing this show. It means a lot when you finally have an identity to like really like hold to your heart.
Yeah, no, completely.
Well, man, that's we covered a lot today. And so Belle, thank you. Where can people find you and where can they read your work?
You can read my work, saltlaketribune.com, I believe, Salt Lake Tribune. We have articles on there basically every day, game recaps, of course, but a lot of features, side stories, try to give you a little look beyond the scoreboard, get to know the players and the community a bit more. On Twitter or X, I'm at Belle Fraser 1. And then I also have a podcast through the Tribune called Inside the Club. It comes out every Tuesday, different interviews with people around the league, players on the team, and a little bit of analysis over there. But yeah, that is where you can find my coverage.
That's awesome. Oh, Belle, we can't thank you enough for being a part of the show today. Thank you so much for making some time to come on the pod. And I'm sure a lot of folks, get a chance to meet and put a face to the writing. And that's pretty exciting. And it's an exciting year and it's exciting times right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, Robin, where can folks find us on the socials?
Yeah, they can find the podcast just about everywhere on social media. You can find us on X, Instagram, and Threads at LO_NHL Utah. We're also on Blue Sky and TikTok at Locked On Utah Hockey. You can find me personally at Robin with a Y _LEANO on X, Robin Ice Time on Blue Sky.
And I spend 99% of my time on Blue Sky, where I'm at Tom Talks, but at Callahan on air on Twitter. It'll always be Twitter to me. So, all right. So, Belle, thank you for joining us. For Robin, I'm Tom. Thank you so much for being a part of today's episode of the Locked On Utah Hockey Club podcast.